Electric cars today, they are very standard in our market. Traffic jam, think about, for each of the households, they have almost like 2 cars. Change in our current standard default way of having mobility schemes and transport. So we really need to start put our attention to that. Hi, here is Markku Wilenius, the traveling futurist. 10 years ago, electric cars were thought as being somewhere remote, distant possibility, and they were treated with a lot of suspicion. Today, they are very standard in our market. What about tomorrow? Actually, electric cars are old innovation. Electric car is an old innovation, but it has only recently become something for the market, and it took almost 100 years. And this hasn't happened only because today we have a Tesla, or it's not because we have much more efficient batteries. It is because the whole circumstances in which we are using those cars are becoming different. So the whole new idea of the mobility is breaking out. It was my friend Lucas Nekema that published almost 10 years ago a book that was telling something about the upcoming mobility revolution. And I think he sort of pinpointed quite well what is going to happen. So what happened was that there are actually 3 things that we want to change in our current standard default way of having mobility schemes and transport, particularly in our urban surroundings. And that is that we want to have a zero emission, and this is why, of course, the electric cars having no emissions have come to play such an important role. But we also don't want to have any accidents. So we are getting into more intelligent cars. The cars that have sensors and senses to ward off any kind of a probability for an accident. But thirdly, and this is perhaps the most revolutionary of it all, is that in the future we might not have an ownership for the cars anymore dedicated to private individuals, because that doesn't make sense. And I will explain you why. The point is this: our population in the cities is growing constantly. There is still ongoing huge shift from rural to cities. And already some time ago we passed the moment when there are more people that are living in the cities versus those ones that are living in the countryside. But at the same time, our cities themselves, of course, they expand at their contours, but in the middles they don't do much anything. So the infrastructure of the cities, the amount of the space which is there, stays essentially the same. Now, most of the big cities today are working and heavily troubled with too much of the traffic congestion. Not only too much pollution, but simply too many cars around. Traffic jams, all that kind of a very frustrating element of living in the city. And we need to be able to do something about it. We cannot continue in that way. But here is one aspect which is maybe the solution to that type of the problem. And that is that we need to move into the services. We need to see the car as a service. We need to create the system that enables us to move in the city without that we need to be thinking about the parking, without that we need to take care of the car. Now, if you think about the 70, 80 years of modernization in our urban centers, what has happened? Even in the cities, people still have not only one car, they might have 2 cars. The average amount of cars that US household owns is exactly 1.79. So think about it. For each of the households, they have almost like 2 cars. And then you don't have to anymore think about, where comes all this congestion, traffic jam. And when you look at those cars, when they are driving around the city, in most of the cases, there is a one person only on board. Now, further on, think about this. So the average time that people are using their cars per day is between 2 and 4%. So 2 and 4%, that is a very little amount of the time that you're using your car. Does it make sense from resource efficiency point of view? Does it make sense that we have these cars loaded here and there, sitting, parking, taking a huge amount of space? Now look at the average lane or highway or any kind of a way that is built for the car. And you may realize that somewhere between 80-90% of that space in the city for an average street is dedicated to cars. Everything else, pedestrians, bikers, scooters, what have you, skateboards, they are pushed to this marginal, somewhere between 10 and 20%, and that doesn't make any sense. So there is a huge amount of inefficiencies there, and if we want to get cities that really function, we need to have the cities that starts to run services on how people use from one way to another. And of course we already have a lot of that stuff. We already have the public transportation system here in Finland. It's an excellent one. Some other places it's not so excellent. But we need to organize this whole mobility scheme in such a way that whatever your need is, that need can be met. At least as much as you are living in the city. Maybe somewhere in the countryside it's a bit more challenging to find the operators for that. But in the cities that should be no problem. And of course that's why we have these 1,000 services that Uber famously started. The whole new scheme of different mobility services. But this is in a way just the beginning, because when you take the other aspect into account that I mentioned earlier, that actually the cars themselves or buses are becoming much more intelligent. Not only that they can drive by themselves, but also that they can take better care of their immediate environment. They can build and rebuild different logistics. They can serve in a much better way their clients by having these different types of intelligent services enabling people move from A to B. That is where also the future of electric cars starts. So I don't like to see that only as a continuation of combustion engines. Electric cars means actually that the new era for mobility has begun. Then there are two additional challenges. The first challenge is that, of course, when the cars are produced, they use a lot of energy while they are producing those, and the material they are using also producing that material is causing emissions and so forth. So if you really want to have this whole chain cleaner, we need to start thinking about what are the types of the materials and what are the types of the production processes that are truly sustainable. And we are only in the beginning of that. I believe strongly myself that the solution, the real solution for that will come from biomaterials. And that means that since we are just at the beginning of that type of the bio revolution, it will still take maybe 10, 20 years before we get to the point that we can actually produce our cars in such a way that we are not causing pollution or emissions by building those. The second aspect is that when we are charging our electric cars, in most of the cases we are still charging that with electricity that is being produced by fossil fuels. This is because still something like the 65% of the world's electricity is produced by fossil fuels. So obviously, to be able to say that electric car is clean, we need to make sure that it uses the type of the electricity which is not based on fossil fuels, but renewable sources. Now, all of this means that we are going to see a very interesting future where this intelligence is brought to the cars. We have just seen the beginning of that. When we are getting out of this early capitalist mode of ownership of things that we are not the best host of. And a car is a good example of that. There are many others as well. And thirdly, that we are doing something for the problem that we currently have, which is that in USA only, the cars are causing, on average, 5 million accidents per year. So those are a lot of accidents and a lot of injuries, a lot of damage, a lot of people, a lot of even children die and so forth. So we need to be able to build up such a cars and car systems that prevent these type of accidents from happening. And there is the new technology which will come to our help. Different type of the sensor technologies, IoT, Internet of Things, the way the cars and the environment connect and talk and learn from each other. All those things are developing as we speak. But I believe we still need to wait a little bit more time before we start to see something that is really building the market access in such a way that we start to see those type of the properties that everybody can buy, not only those ones that have enough money, which is probably the same kind of a development that we saw earlier, what happened with the mobile phones. Mobile phones at first used to be very dear, expensive, only businessmen were carrying them like this. And many thought that that was the end of it. But of course that wasn't the end of it. They became to be something that every person practically can buy as a new or a used one. And so this is going to happen with the cars and the mobility. Because the ultimate issue about how do we live in the urban centers in the future, the ultimate thing that defines our well-being, actually will be defined the way that we organize these mobility schemes in our cities. Our life quality simply is so much dependent on that. So that we really need to start put our attention to that. And indeed, if you look at the cities, how they have been changing here in Helsinki, Copenhagen, Sydney, now even Dubai, and so forth, we see that these new schemes are much more human-friendly. They take up the human scale instead of the car scale, and thus giving us a kind of a new idea how the cities will be built in the future. And with that, also, the future of electric cars will be defined and redefined. Subscribe to my channel, share this video with your friends and look for related videos, and tell me, are you planning to do something about the way you move from A to B? Tell me about it.